Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up for a wild journey into a conflict that shook the world and defied any flashy war name. We're talking about the legendary Yom Kippur War of 1973, marking its jaw-dropping 50th anniversary this year. Israel and the Arab countries were at each other's throats, and boy, did they have some serious beef. The interpretations of this war still vary like a twisted game of telephone across different countries. Picture this. A local skirmish that managed to split the world in half, with the U.S. Secretary of State even calling Europeans jackals. Get comfy, my friends, because we're diving deep into this tangled tale. To understand the war's causes, we'll have to take a trip back in time and quickly brush up on Israel's history. This is living history, and let's start. Some 4,000 years ago, the land that comprises modern-day Israel was bequeathed to the Jews as their promised land. A millennium later, under the leadership of King David, the Jews conquered Jerusalem. However, their first Israelite kingdom did not stand the test of time, fracturing into fragments as they were passed from the Assyrians to the Persians, from the Persians to Alexander the Great, and from the Hellenes to the Romans, all while enduring countless uprisings. Subsequently, during the Byzantine era, Israel witnessed unending conflicts with the Arabs and endured the ravages of the Crusades. Ultimately, in 1516, the territory became part of the Ottoman Empire, where it remained until World War I. Following the war, a quasi-state governed by Britain under a League of Nations mandate was established in the historic region of Palestine. Shortly before the mandate's expiration in 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel within the territory. The United Nations, predictably, expressed concern and merely suggested the creation of two states, one for the Arabs and one for the Jews. However, the very next day, 5 Arab states declared war on Israel, a conflict that would later be known as the First Arab-Israeli War. It was a war where everyone fought against everyone. Britain openly threatened Israel with war, the USSR provided arms to the new country, and the United States imposed a complete embargo on all warring nations. Yet against all odds, Israel emerged victorious, capturing not only the territories intended by the UN plan, but also parts of the hypothetical Arab state that was never realized. To this day, Palestine remains only partially recognized as a state, despite the UN's plans and other agreements. The primary obstacle lies in the fact that implementing these resolutions would require Israel to relinquish the territories it seized in not only the First Arab-Israeli War, but also subsequent conflicts that followed. The Second Arab-Israeli War occurred in 1956, with European powers siding with Israel this time. Their interest stemmed from the desire to control the Suez Canal. Despite the military triumph, the diplomacy of the United States and the Soviet Union prevented Israel and its allies from achieving a complete victory, but the tension in the region remained unabated. In 1967, near the Suez Canal, the rumblings of conflict resurfaced. The Six-Day War proved more fruitful for Israel as they seized the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank, further incensing the Arab countries that had no intentions of backing down. This video is brought to you by Thorum. Take a look at this rings. They have rings made from 4 billion-year-old Gibeon meteorite and genuine 65 million-year-old T-Rex bone. If you are a fan of Vikings, they have Odin ring, the Norse god of war, the Thor ring, and all of them are crafted by hand. Head the link in the comments and use promo code LIVINGHISTORY to get 20% off a truly unique ring. Now we come to the Yom Kippur War. Although in truth it is not a standalone conflict, but rather a chapter within an unending series of Arab-Israeli confrontations. Since 1948, no peace treaty has been signed between Israel and most Arab countries. Prior to the Yom Kippur War, Egypt and Syria sought to reclaim their territories lost in the Six-Day War. Israel, on the other hand, aimed to achieve lasting peace and end the ceaseless exchanges of fire. There were numerous provocations, such as Egypt sinking the Israeli destroyer Eilat during a supposed truce after the Six-Day War, and constantly shelling positions near the Suez Canal. Israel was not to be outdone, and for the first time in history, mobilized the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. Secretary of State William Rogers proposed a widely popular peace plan, suggesting that Israel withdraw from the occupied territories in exchange for Egypt and Syria ceasing all provocations. In July 1970, Egypt officially endorsed Rogers' plan at the United Nations, marking the first ever recognition of the existence of the State of Israel by an Arab country. However, the Israeli lobby in the U.S. intervened, sabotaging the peace proposal and discrediting the American Secretary of State. These underhanded tactics culminated in Egypt and Syria launching simultaneous attacks on Israel on October 6, 1973, the sacred day of Yom Kippur in the Jewish calendar. The Israeli government was caught completely off guard by the war. Initially, the concentration of troops along the borders was dismissed as planned exercises. The subsequent revelation led to mass resignations and protests due to the staggering losses incurred in the initial days. And indeed, there were substantial casualties. The Syrians, armed with overwhelming numerical superiority, reclaimed the previously lost Golan Heights, while the Egyptians, aided by water cannons purchased from the Federal Republic of Germany, breached the sandy fortifications along the Suez Canal and successfully advanced deep into the Sinai Peninsula. Israel's counterattacks in the early days proved futile. On the first day alone, the 252 Armored Division lost 150 out of its 268 tanks, then followed a chain of events, each interpreted differently by various sources. On October 14th, Egypt launched a failed attack. Israel boasts that the victory was solely their own, whereas Egypt refers to the offensive as the greatest tactical blunder solely attributed to General Sadat. Regardless, the Arab coalition lost the initiative, while Israel demonstrated remarkable adaptability in the face of changing circumstances. In the Six-Day War, the Israeli Air Force reigned supreme, annihilating enemy planes and defenseless ground units. However, in the Yom Kippur War, the Arab countries equipped their armies with portable air defense systems and anti-tank weapons, rendering Israel's Air Force powerless. Undeterred, Israel's commanders placed their trust in infantry troops. They probed for weaknesses, penetrated deep into enemy defenses, and held beachheads until additional forces arrived. Amidst the conflict, a massive tank battle ensued, referred to as the Battle of the Chinese Farm. In an area no larger than a couple of villages, nearly 1,000 tanks clashed. Astonishingly, the Arab countries deployed modern tanks and weapons, while Israel, due to Western countries' refusal to sell them newer equipment, relied on World War II-era pontoon bridges. Yet, despite these limitations, Israel's military ingenuity prevailed. After emerging victorious at the Chinese Farm on October 15th, Israeli troops breached the rear of the Egyptian armies, shifting the course of the war and paving the way for localized operations. However, it was not these operations that ultimately decided the war's outcome, but rather events unfolding behind the scenes. During one of the battles, Israel accidentally fired upon the Soviet ship Ilya Mechnikov. The USSR, already supplying the Arab coalition with equipment and aircraft, refused to negotiate with Israel. Instead, they sought the assistance of the United States and warned that if America did not pressure Israel, the USSR would take unilateral action. 7 divisions of Soviet airborne troops were placed on alert, with 3,000 soldiers en route to Egypt's shores, ready to join the war effort. The nuclear forces of both the US and the USSR were placed on high alert, and the newly appointed US Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, hastily traveled to Moscow for negotiations. However, many historians argue that even this behind-the-scenes narrative was not the decisive factor. They believe that economic considerations played the pivotal role in ending the Yom Kippur War. On October 17, 1973, amidst the war, Middle Eastern oil ministers decided to impose an embargo on oil exports to countries supporting Israel. This led to a rapid surge in oil prices, resulting in gasoline rationing in the Federal Republic of Germany and long queues at gas stations in the United States. For the first time in history, divisions among opponents were driven primarily by economic measures. European foreign ministers even issued a special appeal to Israel, urging them to relinquish the occupied territories. In response, Henry Kissinger famously referred to the Europeans as jackals, solely concerned about their own interests. These combined factors contributed to a frozen conflict despite Israel's relative military victories. On October 23rd, the Israeli army halted its offensive, coinciding with mutual nuclear alarms between the US and the USSR. At that moment, Israeli troops were only 60 miles from Cairo and 25 miles from Damascus. However, complete defeat of the Israeli enemy army was never within reach. The subsequent negotiations took on a peculiar nature. On paper, nearly every media outlet in the world portrayed the Yom Kippur War as a victory for the Arab coalition. In reality, the coalition suffered losses 2 to 3 times greater than those of Israel across all fronts. For the next decade, Israeli General Ben Gol vehemently contested the portrayal of the Yom Kippur War as a loss for Israel, recounting the dozens of freshly painted Soviet tanks that burned on the battlefields. Remarkably, due to complex political and economic factors, Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty 6 years later at Camp David. The treaty entailed the return of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt and the official recognition of Israel by the Arab world. Though not all parties were satisfied, this turn of events allowed each country to claim victory. Some regained their territories, others defended their statehood, while some managed to prevent the creation of new states. Unfortunately, the resolution concerning the Arab state in Palestine was never implemented. This failure remained the key source of ongoing hostilities and instability in the region. The Yom Kippur War presented the world with a unique conflict, a confluence of military advancements, economic leverage through oil, and a stark reminder of the fragility of human lives and homes subject to political games. The war witnessed significant migrations of Arabs from Israel and Jews from Arab countries, reaching 6 figures. As usual, it was the ordinary people who suffered the heaviest losses in the conflict. Share your thoughts in the comments section, and as always, thank you for joining us at Living History. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating content.